Hi guys, Jen, Freedom 101, We the People at Large YouTube channel. Uh, I want to talk today about something called the conscientious objection. Years ago, I was listening to Tom Woods. He has a podcast show, and he had a couple people who had just enlisted into the Army and were getting ready to be stationed overseas. And once they had gotten there, they were placed in certain areas. I believe they were war zones. And after some time there, they realized that they weren't really fighting for the freedom of Americans, that they were doing something else that they had objections to morally. So they took their moral objections, called conscientious objections, up their chain of command and were able to get out of completing their contract with the military. And for those who are familiar with the military and its contracts, you know that it's not easy once you enlist to get out of your enlistment. And for those of you who are not familiar, it's almost impossible to get out of your enlistment once you agree to that contract. Another thing is that when I became pregnant with my last child, I decided that I did not want to vaccinate, that I had vaccinated my first child, and I decided against vaccinating my second one. I'm not for or against vaccinating as far as what other people choose to do. I think that if you're going to live in a free society, everyone needs to choose their own path, as long as you do not aggress against someone else, as long as you do not injure anyone else. So everyone can have their own opinions on vaccinations or not vaccinations, and I don't care one way or the other what other people decide to do. But for me, I did not want to vaccinate. So it was sort of a long process for me to figure out how to do it and what to do and all the right steps. But I was able to find, through the Department of Health website, a process which allowed me to let the Department of Health know that I had a conscientious objection against vaccinating. And I filled out the form and sent it in. And in turn, they sent me a cardboard certificate with my daughter's name on it and all the information so that she could attend public school or daycare. This wasn't a paper for my records. I was not keeping this paper in my house. I was taking it to wherever she was attending, wherever she was enrolled or registered, and they were keeping this one cardboard certificate for their records. And I realized that this was for different reasons. It was for some kind of liability reason. It was for the inspection of records for her daycare that she was attending at the time, or later public school, because the schools and daycares, all of their health records have to be kept in order so that the health department can trace back any sort of etymological issues that might occur with diseases and sicknesses and such. So once I thought about all of this, I started thinking about what is utopia and contracts, and what can be forced against you and what cannot be forced against you. And having studied contracts, I know for a fact that it has to be an agreement between at least two people. There can be three people involved, but usually two people make an agreement and they both have to willingly agree. You can't be forced into any kind of contract. So if you were to be forced into a contract, it would not, in fact, be a contract because it would have been done under duress. So I started writing on anything that I didn't agree with, aside from, water bills or my cell phone bill, my electricity. I pay all those, of course, because I want to continue with the service. But for things that I didn't agree to, like traffic tickets or medical bills where you're under duress and you have to get to the hospital and you have to be seen. And besides that, the emergency rooms cannot turn away patients, especially if you're in some sort of pain. I have a friend that I worked with who was a nurse, and I was visiting with her when her golden retriever bit my son and almost tore off his ear. So we went to the emergency room that was right down the road and went in, and because my son was crying and upset, clearly because his ear was almost off, the doctor came in and decided that he was not going to see my son. And he did not know that the friend that I was with was a nurse, and she was very versed in all the laws. So she looked at me and she said, "Hold on, I'll be right back." And she literally grabbed this doctor by his arm, pulled him outside of the room, and just about a minute later, they both came back in, and his whole attitude had changed. He was very pleasant. He was very nice. He offered to give my son some medicine to help him calm down, and so that he could stitch his ear back on and all the things that happened. But then after we left, my friend tells me they cannot deny you emergency service. If you go in for emergency services, they can't tell you no. And then if they can't tell you no, then they can't force you either to sign anything before you're seen if you are in the emergency room, because then that would be a contract under duress. And contracts under duress are not enforceable by law. So if you have to go to the emergency room and you're in pain and they say, sign here, you can sign basically whatever they ask you to sign. But then when you get the bill, you can dispute it. You can negotiate it. You can just write no contract on it and send it back. Most people don't understand why you can do this, or they completely disregard it as a non-truth and say, well, that's your bill, you have to sign it. But if you think about how much insurance costs and how much things such as gauze or shots or IVs actually cost versus what they're charging you, it's phenomenally ridiculous. And the fact that people continue paying it is even more phenomenally stupid. So I am putting this video together to try to further explain why you don't have to agree to a contract, and that contracts are, you can make a conscientious objection to a contract. If you don't agree, then you shouldn't sign it. And if you don't agree to something, you shouldn't do it. And when you do sign something and you find out later that the other person misrepresented themselves or committed some sort of fraud, if it's blatantly clear then it's easy to prove. But if such as the situation that many of us find ourselves in, it's not always clear. It's not always clear that we knew that what we were signing was a contract, or that we understood all of the terms. And sometimes that is difficult, if not impossible, to prove. But what's easy for you to prove and almost impossible for someone else to disprove is your objection to something on a moral ground. And I believe that when it comes to the government, city, municipal, federal, state, county, they're not going to take the time to disprove every single person's conscientious objection to something. They're not staffed for that. So when it comes to contracts, most of these contracts that we follow, we've been following for years and years and years, because that's what our parents did, and in some cases that's what their parents did and their parents did, such as the birth certificate and claiming to be a citizen of the United States, and then ratifying that contract when you're 16 and you get a driver's license, or you're 18 and you fill out a W-2, or what have you, the various ways we ratify our contracts with the state, the federal, city, etc. The driver's license, we have, our parents have driver's license, our grandparents had driver's license, and it's just the way it was done. And when you go to the hospital, they give you a paper and you sign it and you get the bill in the mail and you pay it. So this thing that we live in, that some other person or group of people has decided is a utopia for them, is not a utopia for me. And so I want to show that I don't agree with it. So I have to do that in a way that's non-combative and something that's easy for me to prove and impossible or nearly impossible for them to disprove. And that's, I think, the conscientious objection, objections on a moral ground. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any information on what's worked for you. I take videos to my email address for questions or to post. If you make a claim, make sure that you cite your source. I'm sorry, this video is now over 13 minutes and I've been trying to keep them under 5, but I thought this was something really important to talk about. So if you have any experience with conscientious objections, then I'd like to hear what you have to say. So you guys stay safe and be free.